So, could you please tell me about your career? You're the United Nations Under Secretary General for Global Communications, an incredible position, an astonishing journey that you've had. I'd love to know how you got here and the kind of work that you do.
Yeah, well, I lead communications for the United Nations. So that means, trying to communicate the values of the UN, the story of the UN, the work of the UN, but also to communicate facts and science in an age of where science and facts are starting to become questioned much more than they should. So it's a big, broad communications job, and the path has been through many other UN and international organizations, UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. Before that, completely different, working on communicating about nuclear safety, security, and non-proliferation at the International Atomic Energy Agency. Before that, at a regional organization, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, that was promoting democratic institutions, human rights, cooperation. And then before that, at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which was still broadcasting over the Iron Curtain when I started. So I started out, wanting to be a journalist, but I ended up in this communications field. But my criteria was working for a good cause.
Wow, what a journey. Amazing. Amazing. So, as somebody who's running global communications for the UN, how important is constructive narrative that informs, inspires, and then leads to engagement in relation to the work that you do?
Well, you just outlined our communication strategy. So I'd say we phrase it a little bit differently. It's centered around 3 Ws, which I call the 3 Ws of cause communications. What, why care, and what now? And the what is delivering the facts, the state of our world, the statistics of human suffering, the science of climate change, the latest numbers of people who are in need and suffering wherever it is in the world, whether it's a natural disaster like the earthquakes or whether it is in a war zone. All of these facts are so important for people to know. But in an age where, in particular in the social media age, where people are bombarded with information from all sides, overwhelmed, and even feeling like turning away from the news because there's so much gloom and doom, that second W comes in. Why care? Why should our audiences care about the state of our world? And so that's where we have to, use communications, use human stories, use stories that move and that engage to reach people. Once we do reach people and capture their heart, perhaps, the next thing we just can't leave them like that. And that's where the third W comes in. What now? What are we asking people to do? How can they get involved? And what is the UN saying is the solution?
Wow, so very clear. And you're really sticking to that structure, aren't you?
We're trying. It's actually not easy. And, we're often working from crisis to crisis. And, there's an ongoing war in one part of the world, desperate people suffering under famine, and then, a horrible natural disaster that, to do this properly, you need to really, you need to really plan and think. And so obviously, we react, but what we do systematically is that in every communication, in every speech by the Secretary General, there is always, this is the way out. Don't lose hope. There is a solution. We can get there if we do XXX.
Amazing. Really interesting. So you wrote a book called A Hope More Powerful Than the Sea. Why did you write this book, and could you tell us about the story?
Well, I was working for the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, at a time when we were having, reporting record numbers of refugees. The Syria refugee crisis or the Syria war was raging, and millions of refugees were fleeing for their lives. And, I studied behavioral science and human psychology, and there's a saying that I always have in the back of my mind: statistics are human beings with the tears dried off. People can't grasp the suffering of millions of human beings. People respond to the stories of individuals. So I always endeavored in my work at UNHCR to find, individual human stories. And I found one that I thought, first of all, I need to tell it, because her story alone tells the story of the whole Syria conflict and the desperation of humans. And in very brief, it's about a teenage girl, 19-year-old Doa Al-Zamel, who was part of one of the first refugee waves into Egypt, living a life of a very difficult life. She fell in love. Her fiancé convinces her to get on one of these smuggler boats after many attempts, and she had never learned to swim. She had a near drowning experience as a young girl. They ended up on this horrific boat with 500 fellow refugees crossing the Mediterranean Sea with the promise to reach Europe. After 4 days and 4 nights in the water, the boat, for some reason that has never been investigated or disclosed, the boat was rammed by another smuggler boat and it sank. All 500 people fell into the water. Doa, when she was rescued after 4 days and 4 nights on the water, she was one of 11, and she had 2 little babies on her chest who were not her own, who had been entrusted to her by their dying families. And the love of her life, her fiancé, had also drowned. One of those babies pulled through, little Masa, and Doa is just an incredible survivor, and so is Masa. And the story is tragic, it's desperate, it's horrific, but it's also so full of hope, and that's why it's called A Hope More Powerful Than the Sea.
Wow, that's very moving. Gosh. Gosh, the images of that are just heavy, aren't they?
Yeah.
Wow.
It gives people it's beautiful. I first told the story on the TED stage, and it became a TED Talk, and I remember that audience. It was in Thessaloniki in Greece, and in Greece is where she was rescued to. And I think they felt so moved that their country could be a place where so many desperate refugees were rescued. Almost many have lost their lives on the shore, but it was very clear that not that you could hear a pin drop in this huge theater. People were really, really moved by it. And then after it went out and on TED.com and millions, or a million, or more than a million, watched it, a publisher asked me to write it as a book, and that was an amazing journey, because it was a challenge, because it actually feels like fiction. Like, how could this have possibly happened? It's actually true, but every single bit of it had to be true. I had to go back and interview a very traumatized young woman who didn't really understand why she should tell her story, but later did, and make sure all the facts were correct. And still, it is so moving. There's a young readers edition. It's been published in multiple languages around the world. And so I think it is doing what it was proof of concept of my communication strategy. You bring people into a very complex situation, an ugly war, masses of refugees fleeing, refugees making the decision to get on rickety, untrustworthy boats and risk their lives to cross the Mediterranean Sea, and not really understanding why. But through Doa's story, you can really understand it. You can also understand that there are amazing people who help refugees, and that these and countries and that these are the people in the countries that need to be supported.
What an amazing example of kind of constructive narrative, that informs, inspires, and engages people.
I never heard that term,
Amazing.
constructive narrative. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much of it out there.
Yeah.
Let's put the constructive stuff out there that informs,
Yes.
inspires, and engages. And, so listen, that was really amazing to hear that story. Wow, I just had no idea. I mean, it's very, very beautiful. And it sounds to me like that should just be a film.
Yeah.
Do you think it will be?
Well, it was optioned at one point and for many years by Steven Spielberg, no less, and J.J. Abrams. For many complicated reasons, including through the pandemic, that option period, expired, and we're still hoping. Our agent is busily looking.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
I'll bet.
So.
And I bet that at the end of that film, there's going to be a website to the refugee agency, right?
Absolutely. No, that was that was also, yes. It should only serve good and hopefully also raise funds for refugees. Yeah.
Awesome. Absolutely amazing, wonderful. Okay, so I'd love to learn more about your earlier years, your education, the values that are important to you. Could you talk to me about that? And what would you say to a young individual who aspires to have a career at the United Nations? There's a few questions there.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, well, I grew up in a little town, Marblehead, Massachusetts, near Boston, and very idyllic town where you'd kind of think that there are no problems in the world if you live there and gaze out at the sea, and a good education. But my mother came from South Carolina, and she always instilled in me that there was slavery in our country, and that this is something her children need to learn about. And my father was a history teacher. She was an art teacher, and he taught the history of Europe, also the history of the Holocaust, and taught a course also in Boston called Facing History and Ourselves. So I started to learn about also, horrific, man's inhumanity to man. And I kind of went on this quest. I mean, most people in Marblehead, Massachusetts stay in Marblehead, Massachusetts. This is a beautiful place to live. But I was became so interested in, what's happening around the world, and in pursuing, human rights. Like, how could I work for a bigger cause, something that was greater and better? So I ended up going to Germany and coming back and studying journalism, and then, ending up, working for organizations that were trying to either, deliver information to people hungry for it, or to deliver all kinds of other things: democracy, human rights, nuclear safety, refugee protection, now the SDGs, climate action, basically, trying to make the world a better place.
And so to a young person, I mean, I look at this building, I just get a thrill to walk into, even just to look at it, right? To know that this is the building. I mean, this is what just blows my mind about you, where you are and where you've got to. I mean, to kind of be running communications in the building that's the closest organization that we have to saving the world. I mean, wow. If you were a young person, what a thrill to think about working here in this environment. So what would you say to a young person who's like, wow, I'd love to do that?
Yeah. Oh, I'd make a point to reach out to young people a lot, and to talk to them and talk to them about my job, but also to mentor. I don't have that much time, so now one and then another, but amazing place to work, because you're constantly learning. You are you have a sense of purpose when you walk in the building every day, and you're seeing multilateralism in action, and you're working for a noble cause. I honestly can't imagine choosing a career where you spend 8 or 9 hours a day of your life, and that career has no meaning other than just to make money. I can understand that many people have to do that; they have no choice. But if you do have the choice, it doesn't have to be the United Nations, but it can be non-governmental organizations. It can be the teaching profession. There are journalism. There's so many professions that are actually serving society, and we really need young people to join those.
So I was thinking, sort of asking you, what role is constructive narrative going to play in relation to humanity's survival?
I think narrative is so much because human beings respond to stories, and the stories they consume influence them enormously. So those of us who have the power to create the stories, whether it is as a United Nations communicator or whether it is as a film producer or an entertainer, I think it is important to think about what is that message. I mean, think about just the influence that certain songs have had on people, like Imagine, and how it's really inspired people in a positive way. But I think the way we tell either the narratives around history and facts and science, there needs to be. I think what I'm understanding from your term constructive narrative is there needs to be a purpose to the story. There's a moral to the story, right? Those are the best stories when there's some message, and when you come out of it feeling inspired, and maybe even changed.
And so, this is something
Yes.
that's really important to you, isn't it? When people are telling stories, whether it be a post on social media or whether it be an article, be really conscious about what you're doing.
Yeah. I think we probably aren't going to we're not going to change the haters who are creating narratives that are dividing our societies, that are, causing people to turn against each other, and even offline violence. Those people probably have already existed. The problem is now in the digital age, in the social media age, they now have a weapon of mass destruction. They can spread their hate really fast, far and wide. So there's an onus on the social media platforms, but at the same time, because we haven't seen enough change there. We need people themselves to be aware, and really take care before they share, and really be more skeptical if you're going to be spending a lot of time online. When you're, look at the post. What is the source? What is that person about? Is that article really from a credible website? So again, we need a lot more education to allow people to navigate and not to fall into these narrative rabbit holes that take people into very dark and extreme places.
Well, it's amazing work that you're doing in this area. Brilliant. Couple more questions. So you've supported Peace One Day for a long time, and thank you for that. We've used constructive narrative to raise further awareness of such days as the International Day of Peace and the Day for the Elimination of racial discrimination. Given that narrative is so important to what we both do, is that one of the reasons why you sort of been very helpful to POD, because you know that we're so keen to tell stories about UN days and that's things that are constructive and positive?
Yeah, no, I think it's because you have a positive approach, but I think there are also too few people who are crying out for peace. I mean, thanks to you, we have this day, this international day where everybody stops and thinks about peace. And it's, peace, it's actually when we put out peace messages on our social media, we get incredible engagement. People are hungry for it. So that's why, absolutely, we need to tell the story of peace, not just the story of war.
Where can people get your book, A Hope More Powerful Than the Sea?
Well, it's available in English on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and many of the independent bookstores. It may not be in stock necessarily at your bookstore when you go in, but it's available for order. It's also in multiple languages. So the Spanish version, for example, just came out. So I'm really excited. Many European languages, but also in Chinese. There's also a version in Taiwan. There's a Brazilian version. There's even an Arabic version. So
Okay, so there's a lot of ways.
it's possible. It's possible to get it.
How can individuals who are watching this, the film that we've made today, support you and the work of the United Nations?
Well, I think in a way you can support by being kind of information volunteers as well. I mean, look at the UN messages, follow UN accounts, and help us to spread our messages even further and wider through your own communities. We have an initiative called Verified that called on people to sign up as information volunteers, and we actually, delivered every week information in posts that were very engaging around COVID. We're hoping to shift that initiative to climate, but we have a really great individual action campaign called Act Now. And we have an app called Act Now. Look it up, and you can actually, if you care about contributing to the climate, and every individual action really does matter. Imagine if everyone just did one thing. It won't necessarily. We need, of course, we need the big emitters to do their thing first and foremost. But individual actions do make a difference. Act Now, individual action for the UN.
Amazing. Well, Melissa, you've been a total inspiration to me, and I'm immensely grateful for the support that you've given me. Thanks for talking today.
Great to be with you. Great to see you here in New York at the UN, Jeremy.